to talk about the cost of college tuition and how it's rising in the economy. Tonight, Dr. Martin, give a little bit of background about him. Before he actually got his PhD in economics, he was a consultant for a publicly held company. There he did things like mergers and budgets and other energy studies. But after he got his PhD from Southern Methodist University, he moved on to the University of Texas at Arlington, where he was an assistant professor.
Actually, it's LSU.
Oh.
LSU. That's where I started my career.
Okay, I apologize. Yeah, he was an assistant professor at LSU, and then after that, he took his talents to the University of Texas at Arlington, where he became the department chairman, and then later became the interim dean of the College of Business. When he left UTA, he went to Kentucky, graced us with his presence here, Center College. He is now the Bowles Professor of Economics there currently. So without further ado, I'm going to give the floor to Dr. Robert E. Martin.
First of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about something that I really enjoy talking about, although it's not always that pleasant an issue to talk about, particularly within all of us who are insiders in higher education. Now, the title, of course, is Are College Costs Too High and Is Value Added Too Low? But I want to draw your attention first to the bubble motif, all right? Because I want to say a few words about this question of the college bubble that you may hear spoken about frequently, and also from certain circles. The problem with the college bubble and the implication that there are going to be major shakeups in higher education, and that for-profit firms might play an active role in that creative disruption that would take place. Now, what I want to do from the beginning is I want to debunk that, all right? And I want to tell you that college and college prices are nothing like a bubble as you classically understand them. Most bubbles arise in what we call auction markets, where a commodity or a security is traded on a regular routine basis in a very liquid market. Or it's a fixed real estate asset, for instance, where people begin to speculate in that asset. Now, the primary reason why none of that applies to higher education is because higher education, its output is an intangible asset. There is no flipping of a college education. You simply cannot graduate, turn around and sell that asset you've acquired to someone else. It is yours alone, and it's unique to you in terms of what your college experience was like. So we're not going to see a bubble. We're not going to see a classic bubble. What we are likely to see, however, is that we're going to find considerable disruption, creative disruption from technologies in particular. It's not going to be from competitors entering the market and offering for-profit type of competition with established higher education institutions. Primary reason for that is that all the entry you've seen thus far in the for-profit field has been at the very bottom of the quality ladder, all right? That's not where the rents are. The rents are at the top, okay? So if you would expect to find full-throated for-profit competition for that, it would occur there. Now, there are going to be some economics that I will talk about momentarily here, which will explain why it's never going to happen, because it's the nature of the economics of higher education that for-profit competition at the top of the quality hierarchy is just simply not going to happen in any meaningful kind of sense. So the bottom line for this is, if you're an investor, don't buy shares in an organization that is selling direct competition classroom instruction to established nonprofit public and private institutions, because it's actually just not going to work. On the other hand, if you find companies that are engaged in creating new learning technologies to be sold to existing institutions, now that's something to think about. that's a place to put your discretionary investment where it's likely to pay off. And I'm waiting for somebody to start an index fund for those kinds of companies because I'm going to buy in when that happens. So, all right. So the bubble basically is a misrepresentation of what's going on. Now, the first slide I have for you here is just to establish a context for what has been going on since 1970. Now, this is a series of indexes which include higher education tuition and fees there, and medical care there, and the CPI right there. So they're all anchored at the same base of 1970. They're all equal to 1 at that point. So if you look at the vertical difference over here, that gives you a feeling for the rate of increase in real terms of 1 with respect to what's been going on in the inflation rate. So this is the inflation. So if you took all the inflation out, that would fall over like that. The vertical distance here between these things would represent the real increases relative to other types of things. The first thing you would notice from this is that the tuition and fees part right here is substantially higher than medical costs, okay? So it is the highest outlier. Now, if you did this for net price of attendance rather than tuition and fees, now net price of attendance, that's the whole package. That's tuition, fees, room and board, for instance, and less the scholarships that are being offered to you. You would get a lower line than this right here, but it would still be above. It would still be above the health care, all right? And if you split it out and split it between public and private for net price of attendance, you would get for the publics a cost curve that index rather that looks a lot like health care. The private sector net price of attendance would be substantially larger than health care still. So any way you look at it, whether you look at net price of attendance, you look at the tuition fees index, or you look at the total amount that's spent per student on these, you get a picture that looks like that. The highest outlier is going to be what we're spending on a per student basis to these other comparable indexes. Okay. All right. So that's one aspect of it. The next one that you would want to ask, and this is the point where, after I introduce this next slide, you all nod knowingly and say, yes, I was just about to ask that question. Okay? And the next one is an international comparison of what we spend on a per student basis between the United States and other comparable countries. And the benchmark, the biggest benchmark, that isn't very easy to see, but just let me tell you, that's U.S. right there, okay? The highest bars across here. The OECD countries are, this one right here to the extreme right in each case. And then it's UK and Germany, and then France, the third one there. So looking at this, you can see that throughout the period from 2000 to 2006, which is the latest data I can find on this, you can see that the amount we spend per student is roughly twice what is spent overseas per student. Now, the next issue, after looking at what's been happening to cost and putting it in the context of that, which I'll get to in just a moment, the reasons why I believe that we cannot ignore this cost any longer. The first of them is the thing you just saw about the rate of increase in college costs from 1980 and 1972 to 2011. And the second one is because college affordability has become a bottleneck for economic mobility. So the point I want to make, those of us who have spent our lives working in higher education, is the problem with economic mobility, we're seeing a lot of that problem is because of us. Okay? So when you hear people talking about it, you need to remember that those cost increases you've seen here are one of the primary reasons why people are struggling to move up the economic ladder, both in terms of the cost and, as we'll see momentarily, also in terms of the quality. So we own this problem. The third thing here is student debt exceeds the credit card debt. We've all heard the stories about that. The accumulation of student debt that's required to, for a student to do the full 4 or 6, 7, or 8 years that they spend getting through college, for instance, is a real burden. And it is a significant economic burden because that debt delays household formations and it lowers the level of consumer spending, which is a major drag on the economy. So here we go again. These things have implications. These things have effects. Because of this debt, fewer households are being formed, fewer young people are getting married and buying houses themselves, and the multiplier effects you would normally get from household formation are not there, or they're much smaller than they have been in the past, and because of that absence of that multiplier effect, there are fewer jobs being generated as a consequence of this. If this persists, then it's going to become even more difficult to find ways to get people through this. Now, the college affordability thing too, because of the rapid increase in the cost here, we have been undermining all the public policy efforts to improve access